But health isn't only about healthcare, and it isn't only about eating the so-called right foods or getting enough exercise. It's actually about where you live and what your neighborhood looks like. There's literature, there's research that is growing that shows racism does negatively affect health. But then the question is, okay, so what do we do about it? Because racism is not going anywhere anytime soon. Sort of by disseminating stark facts about how racism, where it comes from, how it operates, how it's perpetuated, that might mitigate against the negative effects that racism has on health. So RISE was part of a broader project called the Black Life Study, and this was a study looking at, so life in Black life stood for linking inequality, feelings, and the environment. And so what I was trying to do was look at how racism affects health. And so there were two aims. The first aim was how does racism affect health? So indirectly and directly. And then aim two was what do we do about it? The RISE portion of the project was an ad campaign that ran for 6 months. And each month was a different ad about racism. And so the way that came out was basically my work. I study how racism and sort of other experiences Black people face in day-to-day life, how those affect their health, what kind of inequalities exist in Black neighborhoods in terms of what kind of resources are there or are not there. And so this work was sort of an outgrowth of what I had already been doing. My name is Kwate, and I am an associate professor at Rutgers University. And on the RISE project, Racism Still Exists, I was the principal investigator of the study, so it's an NIH-funded project looking at how racism affects African American health. There's literature, there's research that is growing that shows racism does negatively affect health. But then the question is, okay, so what do we do about it? Because racism is not going anywhere anytime soon. And so I started thinking, and I was inspired by the Truth campaign, which some years ago, right, was this anti-tobacco campaign where they're trying to get people to stop smoking. No,
that's stupid, no?
That's a horrible act.
Disgusting.
Yeah, it is.
I take that inside and vape it. Dumb.
A document from Big Tobacco in 1989 said that African Americans have problems with their own self-esteem.
I had done work in Harlem looking at outdoor advertising for alcohol. And like most Black neighborhoods in the United States, Harlem was inundated with alcohol ads. And so I thought, well, why not turn that medium on its head, and rather than using outdoor advertising to perpetuate this imperative to just consume, and in particular consuming products that are harmful to health, why not invert that and actually use the ads as a space, as a public space, to make very pointed messages about racism. Right, the first one was about representations of Black women in film. The second one was about racial disparities in school suspension rates. Third one was about fast food density in Black neighborhoods. Number 4 was about targeted marketing by the tobacco companies. Number 5 was about Black-white wealth disparities born out of housing discrimination. And then number 6 was about NYPD stop and frisk disparities. I developed all the copy, all the topics obviously, and the message and the taglines and so on. So I partnered with a professional firm, Studio Kudos. And then they had to think about how to create a cohesive visual campaign that would have resonance, that would be obviously striking, that would get people to notice it, and that would seem coherent, right, from ad to ad.
This project is unusual because we usually then don't get to collaborate with educators. And now you're having a background as, she's a professor at Rutgers, and this project being a research project, we thought, well, this is very different because it's not client-based. We're not creating anything for a specific client, and this is actually more of a public message. We had to go through a few rounds of ideas, brainstorming, but ultimately what worked for Naoyo and for us is actually how to simplify everything. So the message, Maya actually came up with a lot of the ideas, right? For the first one, it's about the idea of how black people is viewed as servants in a lot of movies, or actually they play secondary roles. So we had to come up with, we have to explore ideas of, okay, do we use a photo of Olivia? Do we silhouette her, specifically Olivia? Or do we just represent a servant, the idea of a servant in general? So a lot of these actually come into play not only with the first poster, but with the other ones. We have, for example, the McDonald's concept. We borrowed the colors from McDonald's. However, we can't really use McDonald's logo because then it would be too specific to McDonald's. And we're trying to convey a bigger message about fast food. This message is really not something that you hear every day, especially on a billboard. And one day she sent that picture. It's actually smashed, and someone had tried to tear off the poster. It's shocking, but you can tell how impactful this is to the right individuals, and especially within the neighborhood, which is predominantly black. This must have been really emotionally overwhelming to some people.
So, each of them got varying amounts of discussion, and and it sort of depended on what the content was. So, for example, the stop and frisk one, which I think is the most highly on the Tumblr site, that one got the most sort of reblogs and forwards and whatnot. And interestingly enough, you on the one hand, you would see people for whom that's a real experience, sort of, reflecting that, yeah, this is what's happening on the streets and in terms of being stopped repeatedly. And then you would have a more skeptical audience that would suggest that either the data were not accurate or that, was something that was overblown. And then we also really, as systematically as we could, tried to assess what people's reactions were. So we had folks out at the bus shelters trying to see, okay, are people reading the ads while they're waiting for the bus or getting off the bus? Are they taking pictures of it? Are they talking about it? And we did see evidence of that. We looked as best as we could to see how people were responding in terms of in social media. So we looked at Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all kinds of different websites and blogs. I think that the fact that this project came from a grant mechanism that wanted to fund high risk but high reward projects, I think that this project turned out to be exactly that. It was tricky to pull off, but in the end, I think the rewards were such that there was benefit to the community in terms of really trying to force the pace and in bringing and putting racism on a public agenda, and in trying to stimulate discourse around that, and trying to create a health intervention that's not only about what people typically think about health, which is going to the doctor or eating the so-called right foods and exercise. Clearly all of that is important, but what we don't pay enough attention to are the social determinants of health.